Welcome to the Allison Loves Math podcast. I am super excited to introduce today's guests, Zoey and Bia, who are the co-hosts of the How to Rob a Bank podcast. And they're here to talk about how we can help girls and women in STEM and math to overcome imposter syndrome. So Bia has a bachelor's in mathematics and works in data analytics and financial services. Zoey has a bachelor's and a master's in mathematics, and she works in data science. She works as a data science consultant at an engineering firm. So welcome to the podcast. It's so exciting. I'm so excited to have you guys here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Awesome. So my first question I got to ask right out the gate is, are you really bank robbers?
If we told you, we'd have to kill you.
Awesome. Well, okay. So, on that note, then let's instead, actually, never mind. Let me take that back. Before we get started talking about imposter syndrome, tell us a little bit about your podcast and why you started it and who it's for. Either one of you. How about you, Zoey? Why don't you jump in? Tell us about the podcast.
Come on, Zoey, go on.
It's the hard part about having two people on, right?
It's coordinating. So our podcast is about maths. It's how maths relates to everyday life. We started it because every time we tell somebody we did maths at university, they think, gross, you did maths?
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we want to kind of take that stigma away from maths and show that maths is actually quite fun and very interesting at the same time.
Awesome. And it's perfect because not very often do we have two possible bank robbers talking to us about math. So I like that a lot.
Brilliant.
All right. So the idea that we wanted to talk about today was imposter syndrome. And I had heard you guys talk about this on your podcast a little bit. In one of your episodes, it was a Q&A episode, right? So you just sort of touched on it. I was like, oh my gosh, you guys are like the perfect people to talk about this, because in all honesty, like I didn't know what imposter syndrome even was back when I was in school. So in retrospect, it actually would have been really helpful, I think, had I known what it is. So let's jump in. What is imposter syndrome actually? For anybody listening, what is it?
Imposter syndrome is doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud. It normally affects high achieving people and specifically women and women of color. But it can impact anyone. It can impact men, and it can happen in any situation, whether that's education, work, or even in relationships and friendships.
Right. So it's basically when you do know what you're doing, right? You do have like the foundations to succeed. You are sort of an expert in your area. You are doing well, right? You are succeeding, but you feel like underneath it, I don't actually know what I'm doing. And I'm afraid that somebody else is going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah, so that's where that sort of feeling of a fraud comes in, which, is, I don't know, I found it fascinating when I first sort of found out about it. So let's see. So I know it's common in math and STEM. Why do you think that is?
Oh, there's definitely quite a few reasons. And I mean, I suppose we can answer this question if we talk about the different types of imposters and which types are quite common in like maths and STEM generally.
Perfect. Let's do that. That sounds great.
Okay, great. So one of them is the perfectionist. So someone with super high standards, and if they don't meet those standards, they start to feel like a fraud. I think the one, Zoe, do you want to go with the next one?
Yeah, Zoe, why don't you do the next one?
There's the Superman or woman, and they think they're fraud, so they make up for it really hard and become workaholics to make up that gap of where they think they're being an imposter. And then you have the natural genius. And I think this is super common in STEM. School is a breeze. And as a result, if they don't understand something straight away, they can often feel like a fraud. So it's linked to their speed of understanding, and they can feel ashamed if it takes a bit of time. And then there's the soloist, where they believe they have to do it themselves. They don't want to get any help from anybody else. And if they do, they see themselves as a fraud. Yeah. And then the final one is the expert. So they measure their competence based on how much they know. But because they'll never know enough, because you pretty much can't, they fear being exposed as unknowledgeable.
And I feel like this is kind of linked to women who don't apply for a job unless they meet every single criteria in a job description, and they shudder when someone refers to them as an expert. And I think this and the natural genius are two that's quite common in STEM fields and quite common for women as well.
Definitely. And oh my goodness, I feel like I don't know about you, but when you were finding out about these, do you feel like you kind of related to more than one?
Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah, so let's go through some of these. Perfectionist. When's the time maybe you feel a little bit of the perfectionist version of imposter syndrome?
Do you want to go, Bia?
I was going to say, I think you said that you felt a bit like this one related to you quite well.
Yeah, so I felt like I was a perfectionist at school. I always set myself quite high standards, and I would feel really sad if I didn't meet them. And again today, I think I still have a bit of perfectionism in me. So that's the perfectionist bit.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the phrase or the quote, "done is better than perfect," is like something that I always have to think, especially when we've recorded an episode and it's like, this didn't go as well, but it's done. We need to just get it out there.
No, that's such a perfect piece of advice for that. I feel like I have a similar thing up on my bulletin board over here, and it says massive imperfect action, because I feel like that's sort of my natural tendency is to like wait until everything's perfect, but then, oh my goodness, you can just go down a rabbit hole and work on something forever. And in all honesty, nothing can ever be perfect. And then if you dig it close enough, the amount of time that it took to get there is insane. So that's what I always try to remind myself. I'm always trying to fight against that, waiting for things to be perfect. And I think you're right with the podcast. Oh my gosh, that really drives that home as well, right? Because, the podcast episode can take forever. You could re-record and stuff. And I actually forced myself to do the first episodes of the podcast as Facebook Lives to force myself to like be okay with the imperfection and just, move forward with it.
I think that's something that we might have to do at some point too. Really like just put yourself in the deep end. It's okay if you screw up something.
Yeah. We started out with
Go ahead.
We started out with recording so many episodes and thinking, no, this is not good enough. We can't put this out in the world.
But I think, but I'm proud of you for doing it and getting started, because I think there are a lot of people who think about it, right? And they want to do it. And I bet there are a lot of women in math and STEM who think about it. They're like, oh my gosh, if more, women were just, in math and STEM and like making it through, and I could support them in it, but they, it could be that imposter syndrome that stops some of them from actually doing that. So I'm proud of you guys for getting out there and doing your podcast.
Thank you.
All right. So next one was Superwoman, Superman. All right. So you feel like a fraud, right? So it sort of ends, or the consequences sort of being a bit of a workaholic, right? We talk about a time you've felt that or seen that.
I don't relate to this. I'm definitely too lazy, but I don't know about you guys if you've ever related to this one.
How about you, Zoe? I'll let you go first.
I don't think I relate to this one either.
There's that stereotype of maths people being lazy. I'm not saying we're lazy, by the way. That was just a joke.
No, I think, I feel like this one sort of relates to the perfectionist part, right? And again, I feel like it's something that I tried to work against when I first started teaching. I felt like everything had to be perfect and I had to prepare the lessons perfectly. And it turned out that like I could prep forever, like literally one class could end and I could prep straight up until the next one started. And I definitely always felt like, no matter what, I can always make it better. And so I was ending up making way more work for myself than I needed to. So my sort of piece of advice, if you're someone who sort of does that and sort of naturally gravitates towards over preparing, especially for teaching, set a time limit. And if procrastination sort of helps you, go with that. So I actually forced myself not to like have an end time, but to have a start time. So I actually started just waking up early in the morning to prep. So I had to stop. Like when class started, I literally couldn't prep anymore. So it forced me to actually like keep it to a certain amount of time.
That's great advice. Yeah.
All right, next, natural genius. Oh my gosh, I feel like this is such a big one, right? You not see this everywhere in math and STEM.
Oh, this is too much. I mean, Zoe, do you want to go first?
Well, me and Bia were saying earlier that maths at school is very different to maths at university. I don't know if it's like that in the US. But at school, we found maths, I don't want to say easy, but it wasn't hard. And then when we got to university, it was completely different to what we'd learned at school. The format of maths is very, very different. And I guess that's when the natural genius imposter syndrome kicked in, because something that felt natural to us was no longer natural or as natural.
You said it so perfectly. That's precisely it. When you're kind of used to, knowing that you can solve something before you see it, and then kind of go into this environment where it's the complete opposite. Like I remember being in lectures. I remember my second day of lectures at university, I felt so behind and confused. I wanted to repeat the year. This is the second day. And I was like, I don't have enough time to catch up. And I saw this in my friends, especially my girlfriends. I saw this frequently, and I think I kind of came out of it, and I was able to say, look, maths is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be challenging. Like that's why you're struggling. That's the point. So that's the only way that I found myself able to get out of the natural genius thing, and I think I kind of am out of it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a tricky one, very, very STEM-y.
Yes, I can see that, how lots of students, right, who go into majoring in math or majoring in something in STEM, right, they might have felt that math was easier at like the high school level, the lower levels, right? And so, as much as, we talk about like, having a growth mindset and knowing that math is a challenge, I think there's a segment of students who never have to worry about that at the high school level, right? And if you fall into that idea of thinking, oh, I'm just a natural genius and math just comes naturally to me, then it can really take you off guard at whenever you finally hit that level where it's a challenge, and maybe for some it's in undergrad, for some it might not even be until grad school, right? But it's important to sort of be prepared for that. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be there, right? It just means it's awesome. You finally hit the level of math that challenges you, right? And you're actually going to get so much more out of it. So yeah, I love your perspective, Bia, on seeing it as a good thing, right? Rather than a bad thing, definitely. All right, next up, soloist. I think that sort of goes along with the natural genius, right? Feeling like you have to do it all by yourself. When was maybe the first time in math that you actually reached out for help? Do you remember sort of like what level of math it was, or what class?
Good question. I mean, in school, like if there was something that I felt was unclear, and I wanted help, I never viewed it as something. I never viewed myself as inadequate. I kind of viewed, this information has not been presented to me in a way that I can understand it. I never internalized it. But at university, that was different. I was like, why don't I understand this? What's wrong with me? It was like a very different mindset. And so, yeah, at university, because I kind of felt like you can't get tutoring for maths at university. I felt like this was not an option.
Right, yes.
Yeah, and I didn't have a tutor. Like my tutor wasn't someone who I felt like I could go to, whereas other people had that. People had mentors. Again, like my mentor was partying too much, and so I just felt very like isolated. Like I had friends who were like, yeah, you can copy my assignment, and I was like, I don't want to copy your assignment. I want to understand, because I don't understand. So yeah, I think during the first few months of university, I think I started to feel comfortable with asking for help. What about you, Zoe?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same situation for me as well. I was not very comfortable with getting help from professors, or we had maths parents at university, and they were supposed to guide us through the maths course and the university life in general, and I felt like I couldn't reach out to them either. And so I think that's the soloist thing for me.
Yeah. I remember it was only my final year of undergrad where I was like, I'm paying so much money for university. Like, how have I not thought about reaching out to the PhD
Yeah.
students? And then I started doing that, and they were super nice, super helpful. And I
Mm,
started to understand on like a deeper level. And I was like, oh, I
yeah.
should have done this straight away. I should have just,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a pride thing or if I just thought nobody else was doing it. Like, I don't know what it was, but oh my God, it just would have helped.
Yes,
Definitely.
no, I totally understand that. So I used some math tutoring in high school. I had some health problems in high school. I had like something called chronic fatigue syndrome, where you're tired all the time. It's like an energy thing. And so I ended up sort of going to school part-time for my last 2 years of high school. And through that, I ended up doing some math tutoring because I basically skipped all of math and then like took finals and stuff. So I always saw math tutoring as sort of like a shortcut, right? You realize, gosh, you can learn so much in such a short amount of time. But then it was weird because then when I got to college and I was taking harder levels of math, I thought I definitely had that same perspective of like, you're supposed to know how to do it on your own, right? And that's part of what you're supposed to do, is to figure it out on your own. And I remember my very first class where I really went and asked for help because I was so lost, was number theory. And it was just a totally different type of math than I had taken before. But I felt, yeah, it was weird that very first time, sort of feeling a little bit like a failure, having to go and ask. But I was very fortunate, and I had an incredible math professor who was very excited to like have a conversation about number theory and how we were learning it and what we were doing with it. And so again, but I think that sort of comes back to the challenge of math, right? And knowing that like, at some point you're going to hit that hard class where you need help. And whether it's a friend or a mentor or going to your math professor, part of learning how to do difficult things, right? Whether it's math or whether it's, parenting or something in your career, like having that support system, right, to help you through it is important, right? So don't feel like a fraud, right? I think is the moral there. Like, know that having a support system and having people you can go to for advice and help is just an aspect of accomplishing things that are difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's this quote I really like,
Yeah.
and it's like understanding mathematics is like climbing a mountain that's completely vertical in front of you and completely horizontal behind you. And I'm like, this is so applicable. Yeah. It's just so applicable to anyone, whether you're 8 years old and you're struggling with fractions, or if you're a grad student solving an open problem. It's just, we're all on that journey.
So true. Yes, so true. All right, next one, the expert. Let's talk about that.
This is the one. This is the one.
Yes,
this is the one. I think this was really, really like difficult for maybe both of us before starting our podcast and our Instagram page. There are so many people that know more. I remember not telling my maths friends from uni. I told my other friends who studied other things, but I didn't tell my maths friends because I just felt like, oh, why am I the one doing this? Do you know what I mean? Like, it just felt weird. So yeah, like I don't know everything, and I just felt like this. I still deal with this today. Like this is the one thing that I'd say I relate to the most because I'm still in it. I don't know. I feel like Zoe's definitely gone through similar.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with when we first set up our Instagram accounts, the expert Imposter Syndrome really hit us because we ran into a situation where we posted something about the envelope problem, and we were highlighting how someone might solve it is possibly the wrong way to solve it. And we had somebody tell us that, no, we were wrong. And we were thinking, okay, maybe we are wrong. And we were really unsure about ourselves because we were worried that, we were being exposed as frauds or people who didn't actually know about maths. And at this time, we were a very small Instagram account. And this person who was attacking us was a very big Instagram account. Well, bigger than us, and I think that incident affects us to this day.
Yeah, Definitely, because it's a two envelope problem is a very counterintuitive problem. It's kind of like the Monty Hall problem, if anyone's heard of that. Because yeah, it's supposed to be weird. You're supposed to get it wrong and then be like, oh, I was wrong. But this person that was angry at us, he never quite got to that point where he was like, oh, I'm wrong. And he had this 10-page Instagram story that was like, guys, this account, How to Rob a Bank, they're falsifying information, report them right now, report them from Instagram. And he was so angry at us for having this problem. And it was like, we're not saying that, you know, one country is going to get nuked. This is just maths, man. Like, even if it were wrong, it's not that deep. But he was so angry. And I think we like checked so many sources to try and see if we had been wrong, because I don't know why we assume maybe we were wrong, which I don't think is a bad thing. I don't think if someone's saying you're wrong, I don't think it's bad to think maybe I am wrong. You know, it's like a healthy level of self-doubt.
Yes.
But what ended up happening was that healthy level of self-doubt just spiraled into some weird imposter syndrome. And the difference between like our first episode versus our second episode, because our first episode we had before our Instagram account, and then the second episode we recorded after this incident, and we sound so unsure. We could have said like, and 1 + 1 is 2. We sounded so unsure on everything, and it was crazy. And like, it was only when my sister was listening to it and she was like, you need to say things with conviction, you have to speak with conviction. Why would anyone listen to you? You have degrees. Remind yourself you are the expert. Like, it's okay to be the expert in this thing that you've obviously researched. And so yeah, that even to this day we're like, no, say that line again. That was uncertain.
Right. Oh gosh. Oh well, first, I'm really sorry that you had such a terrible experience like that. I think, you know, that's one of the fears, right, of putting yourself out there, is that there are lots of people who just send lots of negative stuff out into the world, right? And suppose that you were wrong, right?
Yeah.
I feel like there's a totally different way to approach that. You know, it's just sort of like, I don't know, we talk in math a lot about learning from mistakes. Yes. Right. And you don't attack and berate somebody for making mistakes, even if it were a mistake, right? You start a conversation about it, but there's totally a positive and, you know, I don't know, helpful way to do that, you know, rather than just sort of beating people down. But I think that is sort of, you know, I think I have that fear also. And I think that anytime somebody, you know, whether it's putting a presentation together for a conference, right, or doing a podcast, creating a podcast, or being a guest on a podcast, right, or writing a book or writing a paper, a research paper, there's always that fear, right, that people are just going to beat down your work and just hate it. And so, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not sure what my point was there, except that I'm mad that happened. You know, I just feel like, gosh, anytime that somebody tries to like, you know, do something positive and like, you know, put themselves out there, like there should be some sort of, you know, acknowledgement of at least, you know, them trying in something positive. So sorry, that makes me super angry.
Definitely. I mean, we thought he had like a PhD and this and that, but it turned out he was 17. Like many months later, we were like, I can't believe this 17-year-old made us feel so bad. And I think he probably was one of those people, like we said before, who hadn't gotten to that point where he didn't understand maths. Whereas when you have kind of gone through the pain of not understanding something many, many times, you humble yourself. You know, if someone says you're wrong, you're not going to be like, no, you're just going to be like, okay, maybe I am wrong. Let me figure this out.
Right. Well, okay, so we're talking about imposter syndrome. There's what's the other one? It's the opposite of imposter syndrome, right? Was it Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yeah.
I don't even remember the name of it, actually. Yeah, Dunning-Kruger, I think, right? And that's where you think you know so much more than you actually do, right? And so it's like you think you're the expert when you're not. I don't know, it sounds a little bit like that, right?
Yeah. And I think everyone kind of gets this whenever they start something new. Like if you start learning a language, you know, like I definitely feel like, I mean, even starting the podcast, I think we had both imposter syndrome and the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like I didn't think it would take this much editing, this much preparation.
God, but that's so true, right?
And it can be a blessing. Like if I had known it would be this much work, maybe I wouldn't have done it, you know?
Right. No, I think that is actually part of what can lead to imposter syndrome, right, is that fear of thinking that you're the expert when you're not actually, right? It's really tricky to sort of balance everything, because you don't want imposter syndrome to prevent you from doing things, right? You know, or pursuing things, and at the same time, you don't want to be that person who's, you know, out there getting upset at people and having, you know, when you know you're actually incorrect about something. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
but you know, I think, I don't know, it's the expert thing, I think, is a really good one to touch on, because I think that I definitely feel that with my podcast as well. You know, so I have this podcast, Allison Loves Math. I talk to different, you know, podcasters and authors and leaders in education, many of whom are much more expert in whatever we're talking about than I am. And I thought about that before I started the podcast, because I definitely felt like, you know, who am I to create this podcast? And, you know, and I remember my husband was talking to me about it, and he was just sort of like, well, you know, at what point would you, it's something you want to do, at what point would you feel like you're qualified to do it? You know, and I was just sort of like, okay, well, let's break that down, because so I'm an adjunct math professor with a master's, right? I was like, maybe I would feel more comfortable if I had a PhD in math, or maybe if I were a full-time math professor, but neither of those things are things that I necessarily want to do. And then I was thinking, well, you know, geez, if I was a full-time math professor at a community college, would I then feel insecure about the fact that I wasn't a full-time math professor at a four-year university? You know, and then even if you're a full-time math professor at a four-year university, there's all sorts of different levels. You know, would I be insecure about the university that I'm at because it's not Stanford? You know, and then, well, what if I was a full-time math professor at Stanford? Would I still feel insecure because there's other math professors who have published more and are more renowned than I am? Like, it literally, at what level does that insecurity stop? And so if you let that prevent you from doing something, literally, like, you'll never start, because I'm never going to be a full-time math professor at Stanford. That's not in the cards for me. And if I wait until then nothing ever comes, and you just stay small, and you don't actually get to, you know, do the things that you want to do. So I don't know. So I say ignore it.
It's so true. That's exactly how I feel as well. And what helps me as well is like looking at who else is doing similar things. And a lot of the time it's people that have less experience than we do. And I never think, oh, you're only in high school, you know, you don't have the qualifications for this. I never think that. I think that's so great that there are people who are trying to promote maths and stuff. And we're all on our own journey, and we're all doing our own thing. So when I really think about it, well, you know, someone who's got loads of PhDs or whatever, I don't think that if they're a good person, they're not going to look at us and think, oh, you thought, you know.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, I guess the takeaway there, right, is that the fear of not being an expert will always be there, possibly, right? And so acknowledge that it's there, maybe acknowledge that it's supposed to be there, and do your thing despite it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Does that sound like good advice?
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So, okay. So we really broke down the different, I forget, what do you call it? Different types, right, of imposter syndrome. Let's talk a little bit about other pieces of advice for overcoming it, right? I think the first one is understanding what it is, which I think we've covered in depth here. And then, of course, we have that piece of advice, which is just, you know, do your thing despite it. Don't let that hold you back and, you know, not pursue what you want to pursue. But are there other pieces of advice for girls or women in math and STEM to sort of overcome imposter syndrome when they recognize that they have it?
I mean, I think one of the hardest parts is recognizing that you have it in the first place.
True. Yes.
I think that's like the hardest part. Like normally people don't see it. But if you've noticed it, firstly, great, congratulations. That's 90% of the work. But then, yeah, I mean, one thing I've noticed, especially in work, is that nobody really knows what they're talking about. People just have different ways of vocalizing it. You know, I mean, like no one's going to be like, guys, I have literally no idea what's going on. People might say, so just to be really clear, is what you're saying, you know, the way people talk is just radically different, but everyone's basically thinking the same thing. What is going on? So yeah, I think a lot of people put on that they know more than they actually do. And that, you know, I think that's like, I'm really understanding that. It has helped me personally, and I think it will help other people too.
Yes. Oh, I think that's really good advice. Definitely. How about you, Zoe?
For me, I would say to stop saying things like I think. This was something that Bia was telling me a while back, actually. And if you stop saying I think, you start to be a bit more sure about yourself. And it's that self-reinforcement that you are good enough, you know what you're doing. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's a really good one, definitely.
It's like, what's the worst case scenario? For us in the Instagram thing, the worst case scenario happened so early on that I don't think we realized that what the actual worst case scenario was, because in that case we weren't wrong. But there have been times when, like, we have our Sunday quizzes and we have sequences, and it's like fill in the last sequence thing. And there was one time when I had the sequence thing that I made up. There were 4 options, like 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 6, 7, 8 or 9, and the correct answer was 8. And someone replied to this DM saying, actually, you can get 7 if you change the logic a little bit, if you do this. And I was like, I panicked. I was like, oh my God, he's correct. This is terrible. And I was like, do you know what? Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. And he was like, yeah, no, I really like this quiz though, and I really like your page. Keep it up. And I was like, what? I kind of expected someone to get angry, like that I had wrong. And even if you do make a mistake, people generally they're fine. Like, no one's out to get you. It's very rare. So I think we need, especially in STEM, especially in maths, we need like a culture where people are allowed to be wrong safely. And this is so lacking. It's like, that's why we get imposter syndrome. If it was fine to be wrong, especially in a subject where there is a right answer, there would just be fewer problems if we would just had that safety net.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's I don't know. Sorry. I feel like you've got something there in terms of like helping to, it's almost like a safety net, right? You're talking basically sort of about interacting with positive people, right? I know when we have these things like a podcast, of course, you never know who's going to react to what you have. So it's sort of a gamble there. But I think when it comes to school, right, and our jobs and stuff, we do have a little more control of who we interact with, right?
Yes.
And I think that surrounding yourself with positive people like that, right, can really help a lot, because then when you hit those haters, right, or when you come across those haters who are just making you feel bad, then you've got this support system of positive people, right, who are saying, don't worry about what they say, just don't let them get you down, keep on doing your thing. And so I don't know, I feel like maybe that's sort of a underlying piece of advice that you have there is, surround yourself with those positive people who let you make mistakes and say like, it's cool and I love what you're doing anyways.
Yes, exactly. Positive people, they make all the difference.
Yes, exactly. And like you said too, like, because we have a culture that in math and STEM that isn't always open to making mistakes, I think we can just sort of acknowledge, like, we're all going to run into somebody who's going to criticize you for what you're doing or for making a mistake and make you feel bad about it. So it is almost good to sort of like preemptively set yourself up with like a positive support system, right? So who are your teachers at school, right? Who are positive and encourage you? Who are your classmates, right? Who, don't make fun of you for making a mistake, or who you feel comfortable asking questions of and having conversations about difficult things with. So look around and definitely, think about who are the people who support you, right? As opposed to maybe give you more imposter syndrome.
Definitely.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm trying to think, is there anything else that we missed that would be good to sort of cover? Stories or pieces of advice, anything like that?
Zoe, do you have any?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, because we covered a lot, I feel like. I learned so much about imposter syndrome. This was a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, I think we've covered all the main parts. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, before we go, can you maybe share a little bit more about your podcast and where people can find you guys and listen to you?
Yeah, sure. Zoe, do you want to go?
I thought you were going to go.
Go for it, Zoe. Come on. Go plug for the podcast.
Our podcast is How to Rob a Bank with the number 2. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. We're also on Instagram at How to Rob a Bank and Twitter too. yeah, that's where you can find us.
Perfect. And I definitely recommend checking out their podcast. It is lots of fun. I am trying to think, listen to the podcast episode on zombie statistics. Actually, it's really, really good and it's really fun. And honestly, I think, I teach stats, and, stats can be just so serious all the time. And so part of what I love so much about their podcast is it is just a super fun conversations about statistics. Like, honestly, like what I want to see in the world is more people just having these awesome, fun conversations about statistics like you guys have on the podcast. So definitely check it out. Share it with your students also, if you're a teacher, and enjoy it because it's lots of fun.
You're so kind. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. It was so much fun to have this conversation with you, and I do hope that it can help some girls and women who are in math and STEM to recognize what imposter syndrome is, and do their thing despite it. Don't let it hold you back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And thank you so much for listening today. I will see you in the next interview. Bye.